Hi, so today I'm going to be talking about Chapter 10, and Chapter 10 really focuses on motivation. So let's get right into it. One piece of motivation is engagement. So, engagement is the extent of a student's active involvement in a learning activity. So, there are actually four different types of engagement there's behavioral, emotional, cognitive, and agentic. So, behavioral engagement is when someone shows attention and strong effort and persistence. Emotional is where the positive emotions that facilitate task engagement. So, it's like wanting to do something versus having to do something. Cognitive engagement is the ability to paraphrase what they're learning. So, it's kind of what I'm doing right now. I was able to read the chapter and then be able to put it into my own words to be able to teach it back. So, that would be cognitive engagement. And then the last one was agentic. Agentic engagement is to contribute constructively, so to be able to ask questions, to provide input, to be in discussions. So students can show agentic engagement basically just by participating in the classroom. So where does engagement come from? Engagement is actually tied directly to motivation. So if a student is intrinsically motivated or personally interested, then they will be more engaged. And the difference kind of between motivation and engagement is very simple. Motivation is more private, while engagement is more public. So, motivation is something that's inside of you. You decide what is motivating you to get through these lessons, while engagement is more public. Engagement is talking to other students, talking back with the teacher, and being more public in those responses. So, how can you help engagement? Helping engagement actually happens before even starting the lesson. This is in the planning stage. So you want to make sure that you plan the lesson out thoroughly and to be organized so that you can understand where the lesson is going to be going. And then during your lesson, you want to be able to keep track of engagement. So that means making sure that you're understanding if a student isn't participating a lot or if they're participating too much and just trying to find that balance in between. So why is engagement important? So it makes learning possible. It can predict students' progress. It's malleable. It's up to the teacher's influence. They decide how much engagement they're seeking out of a lesson. And it gives moment-to-moment feedback. So if the students are not engaging enough, it's telling this teacher that either the lesson is too boring, that they don't understand the lesson, or that they just really are not interested in what's going on. So that moment-to-moment feedback is really important for kind of being on your feet and changing the lesson as it goes along to make sure that your students are really understanding what's happening. So how do all of these pieces actually interact? There are four different pieces: the learning environment, student motivation, student engagement, and student outcomes. And all of these influence one another. As one influences one and changes another, and it just all comes together. So, two examples. If a student is lacking motivation, they don't have motivation, a teacher could try to increase engagement. So they don't have the motivation to do something, they can try and increase the engagement and get them to participate in the lesson, and then enhance the learning environment. If it's too loud or if it's too cold, really making sure that we're doing the best that we can to make this environment as the best as possible, so that the student can in turn help their motivation. Another example could be if a student is lacking engagement. So a teacher can reassess their motivation. What are they working for? Why do they want to do well in this class? And then they can then increase the outcome, so they can help as much as they can for this motivation to make sure that the outcome is the best that the student can do. So just talked about motivation and a little bit through the engagement. So let's discuss it a little bit further. Motivation is, the definition, any force that energizes and directs behavior. So there's three pieces to actually understanding motivation. There's different types of motivation that exist. And to figure this out, it's more important to ask why a student is doing something instead of asking how much motivation they have. So it shouldn't really be on a scale with no motivation all the way up to a lot of motivation. It should be, why are you working for this? Why do you want to succeed in this class? Another thing to remember about motivation is that some types actually do produce better academic functioning. So there's two types, intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic is an inherent desire to engage in one's interests. So that's something inside saying, I want to do this because I want to be able to succeed. Well, extrinsic is environmentally created. So extrinsic could be, oh, well, if I do well in this class, my mom said she'll buy me a TV. That's something in the environment that's helping the student to want to succeed. But a really important thing about motivation is that it does need supportive conditions to flourish. So a teacher must understand that students need this motivation and be able to help enhance it and to really hone in on the conditions that these students are in so that they can control their motivation and keep going with it, basically. So I just talked about extrinsic and intrinsic motivation, and this is actually a really important piece to discuss. So there's this thing called the hidden cost of reward, and that is an unexpected effect that extrinsic rewards sometimes have on intrinsic motivation, learning, and self-regulation. So these extrinsic rewards sometimes have an adverse effect, so they need to be used wisely. So extrinsic rewards can be beneficial, but other times they actually can be more detrimental. The cognitive evaluation theory uses extrinsic motivators by giving them to students in a non-controlling and informational way. So the cognitive evaluation theory would say that praise is a great way to be motivating these students. But with that being said, there's actually a difference with motivating students with intellectual disabilities. So motivating a typical student would be non-controlling and informational, while motivating a student with intellectual disabilities requires more of a controlling motivation style, because this is working on controlling the behaviors presented. So it is a big difference between the two, and it is important to remember that the motivation styles can be enhanced differently for different types of students. So when it comes to motivation and engagement, there are actually 3 different psychological needs. So a psychological need is an inherent source of motivation that generates a proactive desire to interact with the environment to enhance one's personal growth. So it's saying something that they need to do with their environment to make themselves feel better. And those 3 psychological needs are autonomy, competence, and relatedness. So autonomy. Autonomy is the psychological need to experience self-direction in the initiation and regulation of one's behavior. So this actually does happen on a scale. There's low autonomy and there's high autonomy. Low autonomy is when a student is being forced to do something, so they don't have any interest in it, and they're being forced to participate do these lessons. While high autonomy is wanting to do something, actually wanting to participate and wanting to be in this lesson. So autonomy is a supportive motivating style. So when teachers work to nurture and satisfy student needs for autonomy during instruction, that's very helpful. They need to adopt the student's perspective, welcome students' thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and support motivational development in general. So for autonomy, to enhance autonomy, teachers need to provide explanatory rationales. So say why something is happening, say this is the answer and this is why this is the answer. Use non-controlling language. Display patient for self-paced learning. Some students learn faster than others, and acknowledge expressions of negative effect, because it will come across, and that is something that does happen. So it means more to actually recognize that those things are happening. So the second piece to psychological needs is competence. And competence is the need to be effective as one interacts with the surrounding environment. So there's kind of this challenge, it's the optimal challenge, where you want to make sure that you're giving tasks that are hard enough but not too easy for your students. This will actually create a sense of accomplishment. So if you give a student something that's way too easy, they're not going to find motivation to want to continue to learn because it's easy. Oh, I finished it. I'm bored. This is kind of dumb. But then on the other side of that, if you give a student something that's too hard and they can't accomplish it, it makes them feel like they're not going to do well at this, and it demotivates them. They need the help. They need too much help, and it's just finding that balance between what's too hard and too easy. So optimal challenge is actually the key to competence, and the positive feedback is what satisfies it. So telling a student, great job doing this. I really like how you're interacting this way. I like how you're thinking of these different creative options. Like, great job. So this positive feedback is actually really important for this optimal challenge, which in turn is for competence. But with that being said, with competence, there needs to be an error tolerance. So the teacher has to recognize that errors happen and they need to happen in order to learn. As we all know, we've all been students. We see that we make mistakes, and that is how we learn. You can go up when a student makes a mistake, a teacher can say, okay, why did you think this way? Well, that I can see why that would happen. Well, this is how it should happen, and explain why and give that explanatory rationale for it, and understand that these mistakes are going to happen, and let students know that it's okay to make mistakes. So that has to do all with competence. But the last part for psychological needs is relatedness, and that's the need to establish close emotional bonds with other people. So that requires social interaction, group work, doing things together. And this relatedness is very helpful because it actually works on a lot more skills than you would think. So you're working on the skills of doing the lesson and learning those plans, but you're also enhancing their social interaction and their ability to work with others, and that is one of the psychological needs. So another important piece to engagement, so back to our main topic of engagement, is curiosity. So curiosity, the definition is a cognitively based emotion that occurs whenever students experience a gap in their knowledge. So curiosity is when someone's super excited because they're like, ooh, I don't know what this means. I hope to find out soon. It motivates exploratory behavior. So if you say something and then the student says, maybe I can go look this up later. I kind of want to find out more about it. Maybe I can research it in one way, or I can go find out in another way. And a good way to work with curiosity is guessing and feedback. So a teacher can pose a question and say, what do you think about this topic? And then, why do you think this happened? And then give the student feedback on what they're saying. So if, they hit it right on the head, hit the nail on the head, then they can say that. Be like, great job. I like how you were thinking about this. So guessing and feedback is really important to curiosity. And then there's also the suspense piece. So posing a question at the beginning of the lesson and then waiting until the middle or the end to actually answer it, so that it piques the curiosity and wants the students to continue to learn and to listen until they get the answer to that question. So while all these are important to engagement, there are actually also other pieces that may hinder engagement a little bit. One of those is anxiety. So anxiety is the unpleasant, aversive emotion experienced in evaluative settings. So this is in evaluative settings when someone is watching you and giving you a grade. So it could be a presentation, it could be a paper, it could be a worksheet. And this creates anxiety in some students. And that is really important to note because it can affect their self-worth. Self-worth is the evaluation by others of one's own personal worth. So students can be getting anxiety because they're nervous they're going to get an F on one of their papers, and then they're going to internalize that and say, oh, well, what does that mean about me? Am I not smart enough? Am I not good enough for this? So it's really important to recognize that does have to do with engagement, that these students could be just experiencing anxiety. And with that, something that some students do would be self-handicapping. And that is a defensive self-presentation strategy that involves a deliberate effort to interfere with one's performance to save face for failure. What that means is if a student knows that they're going to fail a test that's coming up, they're going to say, I'm not going to study for this test because I know I'm going to fail it anyways. So when they do eventually fail that test, they can say, oh, that's okay. I knew I was going to fail, so it doesn't hurt me that bad. So they're actually self-handicapping themselves. When they could have been spending the time studying to get a better grade, they say, oh, I know I'm going to fail anyway, so I'm not going to do it. And that also ties into anxiety and self-worth because they're trying to avoid this anxiety of doing poorly on an exam or a presentation. So those could be some problems with motivation. And another problem with motivation is the opposite. So amotivation. That is when there is no motivation at all. This can come from the feeling of lack of control over school-based outcomes. So students just won't put the effort in. So they know that they don't really have control over what's happening. And that if they have no control, then why even participate at all? So that's another problem with motivation, along with anxiety. So when it comes to these motivations and the problems with it, it is important to remember, like, to keep lessons interesting. So if there's a boring lesson, basically evaluating what this whole chapter is about and working on it to better the lesson. So you can increase valuing, increase interest, promote intrinsic goals. All of those things would actually help to make the boring lesson not as boring, and then make students want to be engaged and to have motivation to do well in those classes. So that is chapter 10 in a nutshell, a very dense chapter, and I hope that my explanation could have helped to understand it a little bit better. Thanks.